The Starship Enterprise has become an ark of hope to a new generation. Star Trek offers us a vision of what it is to be fully human, to explore our universe with a band of brothers and sisters, to live out a kind of cosmic monasticism. I believe it is a glorious new mythology, a wonderful addition to our ancient holy books. Star Trek, live long and prosper.
This Star Trek franchise, which exists here in this studio, Paramount, has to date been worth almost $4 billion to the studio. I mean, that's more than the gross national product of a lot of countries, isn't it?
The joke about beam me up, Scotty, there's no intelligent life here, I suppose has traveled around the world by now. Live long and prosper is in the culture. People understand what you're talking about. People recognize this as a symbol of an icon.
Astronauts became astronauts because of Star Trek. Movie makers became movie makers because of Star Trek. It affected people's lives in a very minor way, where they had to take a Tums after dinner because they were watching it during dinner and didn't chew their food properly, or it changed a life and sent it in another direction.
I think it's better than a religion, if I may be so bold. It's a cultural uplifting that all peoples can feel connected to.
Star Trek.
At the edge of the universe, 400 men and women are probing the immeasurable blackness of space. Their leaders are an Earthman with no fear and a stranger with no heart. Worlds beyond imagination lie before them in Star Trek, every Thursday on the NBC television network, in color.
I had known about Roddenberry a bit because he had a series on NBC. I'd known he was a former police officer with the Los Angeles Police Department. I'd known he was a former pilot with Pan American. And I figured, hey, this is a stand-up, straight-backed, aggressive, hustling man. The door opened, and this kind of tall, badly dressed, muttering man walked in with a piece of paper in his hand saying, I have this idea for a television series. I call it Star Trek.
Gene Roddenberry was very complex, very talented. He had a very strong and wonderful passion that had to do with the potential of mankind.
He did say one thing to me once that I found incredibly peculiar. He said, you know, Data has a Christ-like naivete. And I thought, was Christ naive? I'm not sure. You know.
He had the reputation of being a real son of a bitch, and nobody wanted to work with him. I was the youngest tenured person on the staff, so I got the job.
Gene would borrow things from people, ideas, concepts, what have you, and Gene would never mention where they were from. He would not say that they were his ideas, but he would lead you to believe they were.
People worked in it. They brought ideas, they brought thoughts, they brought expertise to it. But as far as the idea of the show is concerned, that was Gene Roddenberry's, and I resent anyone who comes along and tries to take that away from him.
There was this very tall, weird person on the set, this man in a tweed overcoat and a hat and a hawk nose. And he kept walking up behind me, and he was so creepy. And I was getting ready to really let him have it when I realized it. And I went, Mr. Roddenberry! Gene, oh, future visionary Gene, you gave me tears and laughter, Gene. You shine the starlight on my dream.
a daring flying hero, Gene. You always soared with eagles, Gene. Your universe was meant to be. Gene, great bird of my galaxy, you gave.
I wasn't quite sure that the American audience was ready for this. I mean, we had our Buck Rogers, and we had our Flash Gordons, and we had our Space Patrols. But Gene had one thing that I thought was really, really special, and that was that Gene set the whole thing as a naval ship. It was something that we, the audience, could easily understand. It was yeoman and port and starboard and admiral and captain and such. And it wasn't weird names. It wasn't Spaceship X9 and such. And I thought that was really great.
The Starship Enterprise made her maiden voyage in a pilot for the NBC television network. There were few familiar faces on board. Only one character was to survive to the first series, and even then, his survival looked uncertain.
Check the circuit. All operating, sir. Can't be the screen, then.
Definitely something out there, Captain. Headed this way.
NBC was worried that Spock was perhaps too devilish and frightening and off-putting for the viewers and potential buyers of the series, and they decided to humanize him, to eliminate this Mephistophelian look, to eliminate the pointed ears, and to some extent to straighten out the eyebrows. That's interesting, thought I. And fortunately, Gene prevailed. They didn't want the character in the series. They were nervous about the character.
They're on the air like 4 weeks, and NBC calls and says, "Hey, can we get more of those Spock shows on quickly?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Well, the phones are ringing off the hook, the mail's coming in, the affiliates are thrilled, the sponsors are happy. We got a big star on our hands."
NBC did a total turnaround and said, "Well, we have to have more Spock." And we knew all along that this would be a wonderful character, and give us more Spock. Just have Spock on screen all the time.
Fail to see what they find so amusing.
What do you call those?
I call them ears.
You belong in a circus, Spock, not a starship.
You pointed-eared hobgoblin.
Why can't I blow off just one of his ears?
He was exotic, interesting, mysterious, unique.
Hit me. Harder. Again. That will be quite enough. Thank you, Doctor.
Fun, clever, intelligent. They tell me sexy.
I love you. I don't know why, but I love you. I do love you.
There was an explosion of interest in the Spock character.
I said, please don't tell Spock that I said he was the best first officer in the fleet.
Why, thank you, Dr. McCoy.
You've been so concerned about his Vulcan eyes, Doctor. You forgot about his Vulcan ears.
I've been involved with a particular character for 30 years. And I think it's fairly reasonable to expect that that character would take on an identity within mine, as part of my own. And I think it's reasonable to understand that I hear a voice sometimes that is more Spock-like than my own. I don't always talk like him. I don't act like him. I don't necessarily think or experience things in the way that he does. But every once in a while, in a given situation, I might hear a voice that says, do you really think that this is the approach you want to take to this problem? Really? Oh, maybe you're right. Maybe I should rethink this. And that rational voice is the voice of Spock, sitting on my shoulder, sort of, watching and occasionally commenting on my process.
Fascinating.
Back in the 60s, there was a fierce amount of censorship that was going on. And you couldn't talk about things. You couldn't talk about war. You couldn't talk about black-white problem. You couldn't even talk about mother love, and I'll never understand why for that. But there was a whole list of taboos. And Gene always wanted to tell people how he felt about it. He didn't care whether, you know, they did or not, but he'd like to kind of set an example and talk about it, and he wasn't allowed to. So he figured, well, maybe if I put these people in funny costumes and stick them out into space, I can get by the censors with it. And by God, he did.
Many of our best stories grew out of the reality of what was happening in the world at that time, and particularly in the United States, the civil rights movement, for example, the various assassinations that had taken place, and some of our best episodes were drawn from those issues, so they were relevant.
That was in the late 1960s.
Apparently, Captain. So are we.
I was growing up in the South in a segregated community. I went to segregated schools. And when I first looked at Star Trek, what I saw there was a phenomenal representation of a utopian society which was governed in part by multicultural principles. That is, I would have seen the first interracial kiss on American television. I would have seen Russian crewmen aboard a U.S.-based spaceship in the midst of the Cold War. I would have seen black and Asian American characters represented on American television.
As an Air Force chaplain, I saw actual hydrogen bombs. I learned we could blow our world apart, and I started looking for an alternative that was life-giving rather than life-destroying. And one of these alternatives that appeared on television shortly after I left the Air Force was Star Trek. We had a crew made up of different races and sexes, cooperating and not fighting each other. What a wonderful vision, I thought. And finally, I decided to preach a sermon about it.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
It was, on one hand, a story about JFK, about John F. Kennedy. I think Kirk is very much modeled after Kennedy. The youngest Starfleet captain, the young PT boat captain who became the youngest American president. A lot of the rhetoric was about, I think in some levels one can see Starfleet as the Peace Corps in outer space.
We set sail on this new sea because there is new knowledge to be gained and new rights to be won, and they must be won and used for the progress of all people. For space science, like nuclear science and all technology, has no conscience of its own. Whether it will become a force for good or ill depends on man. And only if the United States occupies a position of preeminence can we help decide whether this new ocean will be a sea of peace or a new terrifying theater of war.
Space, a final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
I have a theory that you can really get sort of a glimpse of America